I used to believe that silence was empty, that it held nothing except the echo of what had already been lost. 3 months after the divorce, my life looked exactly like that kind of hollow quiet. The $5 million business I had built from the ground up was no longer mine, my name had been removed from the office door, and even at family dinners, I was introduced as the daughter who tried but failed. I was packing a small emergency bag that evening out of habit more than hope. 2 shirts, my old laptop, the passport I hadn't used in years. Starting over at 34 felt less like a plan and more like learning how to breathe after being held underwater. My sister came to visit just before sunset. She arrived in a new silver SUV that still smelled of polished leather, wearing the confident smile I once had. Beside her sat her little daughter Emma, the child everyone in the family called mute. Since birth she had never spoken a single word. Doctors had declared it a permanent condition. I loved the girl in a protective, almost desperate way. Perhaps because she was the only person in that house who didn't measure me in money. She held my hand as soon as she entered my apartment, her eyes studying my half-packed boxes like they were telling her stories. My sister and her husband stayed for tea for less than 20 minutes. He barely looked at me, busy on his phone, probably handling family company matters, the same company my mother had transferred to them after pushing me out. When they stepped outside to take a call, the room suddenly became weightless. The air conditioner clicked, the neighbor's dog barked, and the girl tilted her head toward me. Then in a clear, careful voice, she said, "Aunt Fahad, don't go home tonight." The sentence cut through the walls. I felt the floor move, the way it does during a distant earthquake. I stared at her, certain I had imagined it. But she repeated the words, slower this time, as if she understood how unbelievable they sounded. My hands turned cold. The child who could not speak had chosen that exact moment to break a lifetime of medical certainty. She pointed toward the window where the SUV was parked and added, "He is angry with you." I asked her who she meant, yet before she could answer the front door opened again and the adults returned. Instantly she went back to being the silent girl, coloring her sketchbook in small obedient circles. The rest of the visit passed in confusion. My sister talked about how difficult their therapy sessions were, how brave the child remained despite her condition. Her husband joked that I worried too much about the past and should be grateful for their success. I kept hearing the girl's voice inside my head, wondering what kind of miracle carried such fear. After they left, I opened the glass again to pour water and noticed a faint, unfamiliar smell near the kitchen, something metallic, almost like leaking gas. My phone showed 3 missed calls from an unknown number. That was the first time I understood that silence might be full of secrets waiting for parents to leave the room. I sat beside the sketchbook the girl had forgotten and saw she had drawn my apartment with a red cross over it. Under the drawing she had written in shaky letters, "Tonight." The emergency bag suddenly looked less crazy. It looked necessary, like the child had already packed it for me with that single impossible sentence. I did not sleep at all that night. I sat in the middle of the apartment surrounded by boxes that looked like pale tombstones of my previous life. The unknown smell kept returning in soft waves, and every time it did, I remembered the red cross in Emma's drawing. I called the building maintenance to check the kitchen line. They said everything was normal. Normal had become a dangerous word in our family. My mother had used it when she signed the papers that handed the company to my sister, and my ex-husband had used it when he emptied our joint accounts. Still, the child's voice felt more real than any adult assurance I received. Near midnight the phone rang again from the same unknown number. When I answered, there was only breathing, then the call dropped. I tried to focus on practical steps. I still had legal access to some of my old business emails, and while scrolling through them, I found a message from my brother-in-law sent by mistake to me instead of his accountant. It mentioned an insurance policy connected to my apartment address. My name was not on it. My sister's was. I felt a slow tightness climbing up my chest, the kind that does not scream, only warns. The next evening my sister invited me to stay over for a few days until I settled down. I agreed because I wanted to be close to the girl who had spoken. Their house was large, bright, painfully successful. Family photos hung on the walls like certificates of belonging. Emma followed me to the guest room carrying her sketchbook. She touched her lips, then waited. The moment her parents left again for a short walk, she spoke for the second time in her life with me. "They will take you for a drive tomorrow." I asked her why she talked only when they were gone. She answered, "Silence keeps me safe." Her sentence sounded older than her age. I began to notice how carefully she watched her father, how her mother avoided meeting the child's eyes when discussing therapy. I asked for the attic to store some boxes and discovered old files of my business hidden there, the same presentations I had created years earlier. Someone had planned to rewrite history using my own work. The child came upstairs silently, then as soon as adults' footsteps faded, she said, "He changed the brakes in your car." I didn't even own a car anymore. But my sister did, the new SUV. I realized she meant the vehicle parked outside, the one they insisted would be used to help me move the next day. The drive they talked about so kindly had begun to look like a tunnel without an exit. I messaged my old lawyer friend Samina without giving full details. She advised me not to ride in any family vehicle until documents were reviewed. Adults continued discussing how I should forget the past and join the normal flow of life. Meanwhile, the child kept building a map out of single sentences. Small truths dropped only when doors closed behind parents. By the third phone call from the unknown number, I was certain that the miracle in that house was not the child speaking. The miracle was that she had chosen me as the listener. I looked at the photos on the wall and understood that success in our family had grown teeth, and that a girl everyone believed mute was possibly the only voice that could bite back. The morning meant for the drive arrived wearing an innocent blue sky. From the kitchen, I could hear my sister humming, preparing sandwiches like we were children going on a harmless picnic. Her husband said he had arranged a meeting with a potential employer by the river road, a surprise opportunity to help me restart my career. I watched the confidence in his movements, the same confidence that had convinced my mother to trust him with what I built. Every adult in that house performed kindness with professional discipline. Only the child looked at me like the weather was lying. Emma stayed close to me while the preparations continued. She held the strap of my emergency bag, refusing to let me put it back in the guest room. When her parents stepped out to load things into the SUV, she spoke again, quick and urgent. "Say no to the water they give you." I felt the blood leave my face. I had been planning to agree to anything just to avoid conflict, yet the girl was dismantling that surrender piece by piece. I began inventing excuses, telling my sister that my lawyer needed to see the insurance papers before I traveled anywhere. Her smile flickered for less than a second. The unknown number called again while we were eating breakfast. This time there was a recorded message, a man's voice saying my apartment would be inspected that evening. My brother-in-law immediately offered to handle it for me, insisting I should relax and let family take control. The child squeezed my hand under the table. Control was exactly what frightened me now. I asked casually whether the SUV had been serviced recently. He answered too fast, "Yesterday." My sister looked confused. She didn't know about that service. The fragments began to connect themselves like magnets finding iron. An insurance policy in my sister's name, a sudden service done without her knowledge, a stranger breathing on the phone, and a child speaking only when parents left the room. I stepped outside pretending to help load boxes and noticed a second car parked across the street, engine running, windows dark. When I returned upstairs, the girl waited for the footsteps to fade and said, "That car belongs to the man on the phone." I asked her directly whether her father planned to hurt me. She answered in the simplest, heaviest voice I had ever heard, "Yes." The single word weighed more than $5 million. I told the adults I would not go anywhere until the meeting location was changed. My sister became emotional, saying I insulted their hospitality. Her husband acted wounded, calling my mother on speaker to complain about my paranoia. From the attic, I held the old files I found and realized they had been preparing to erase not only my career, but possibly my existence. The child opened her sketchbook again and drew a small cup with a black skull inside it. Outside, the river road waited like a patient animal. I finally understood that the life I was packing was not the old one. It was the remaining one, guarded by a brave, impossible voice. I began to move through my days like a person learning a new geography of fear. Until then, I had assumed the worst chapter was behind me. The divorce hearings. The moment my mother declared in front of relatives that my sister was her pride while I was the lesson. But the attic files and Emma's careful confessions had opened another map entirely. One where roads, cups of water, and insurance stamps all pointed toward the same dark center. I decided to return to my apartment for a few hours pretending I needed more clothes. Yet in truth, I wanted to see whether the maintenance visit had been real or only a voice meant to push me back into my sister's control. The building corridor felt different, too quiet for a Tuesday. The neighbor who usually greeted me avoided conversation, saying strangers had asked questions about my schedule. I checked the kitchen window and discovered a tiny scratch near the lock, something freshly made. My sister's husband called twice within an hour asking when I would return. The river meeting was still waiting, he said, and my mother had already told everyone about the opportunity they had arranged for me. Opportunity had started to sound like a courtroom word for execution. That evening, I installed a small portable camera inside the apartment without informing anyone. Samina, my lawyer friend, finally reviewed the insurance message and confirmed it was unusual but not yet illegal. She advised me to document everything and avoid direct confrontation. While packing again, I found a USB buried between books, labeled with my old company name. I had never placed it there. When I returned to my sister's house, the child waited by the staircase like she was counting the rhythm of my breathing. As soon as her parents left again to visit my mother, she spoke in longer sentences for the first time. "Aunt, he wants the apartment empty so the policy can work. They planned a robbery to scare you. The water has medicine to make you sleep." Her honesty felt like someone switching on lights in a room I had been forced to cross blindfolded. I asked her why she protected me instead of her own father. She answered, "You listen when others don't." Listening became my only weapon. Over the next 2 days, the camera recorded my brother-in-law entering the apartment using a copied key, placing tools near the window line. The USB I discovered contained rewritten contracts showing my sister as the founder of what I built. I felt anger rising beside fear, a twin emotion finally returning to me. During dinner, adults continued joking that I should be grateful to share success rather than complain about destiny. The child touched my shoulder when the parents left the room and said the date again, tonight. I refused to drink any water offered and told them I would sleep in my apartment instead of their house. Her husband became tense, saying the maintenance visit required me to stay with family. My sister cried to my mother on speaker, while the child stood behind me silently forming another sentence with her eyes alone. I understood then that survival sometimes begins by saying no to the people who insist they love you. The river road finally lost its passenger. But the house had not yet lost its secret, and neither had the brave girl who continued breaking it open only for me. By the time January settled over the city, I was living two parallel lives. On the surface, I was the cautious woman my family described, jobless, recovering, dependent on the couch of my sister's bright house. Underneath, I had become a quiet collector of evidence. The portable camera in my apartment blinked like a mechanical heartbeat, and every recording felt like another bead on a rosary of survival. I stopped arguing at dinners, stopped correcting my mother when she told relatives that transferring the company had been the best decision for everyone. I let them believe I was learning how to disappear gracefully. Only Emma refused to participate in that theater. She waited for the exact moments when doors closed behind adults, as if the house itself gave her permission to breathe into language. One afternoon, her parents left again to meet a contractor about renovating the attic. The girl turned to me in the hallway and said, "They are fixing the story upstairs." I asked what she meant, and she explained that workers were instructed to shred old files of my business, the presentations I had discovered earlier. Her sentences were still simple, yet they were growing muscles, learning how to walk. I decided to bring the USB from the apartment and test the rewritten contracts against my remaining emails. Samina confirmed that the documents were part of a plan to accuse me of intellectual theft instead of recognizing me as the creator. The accusation would justify the insurance policy and possibly the staged robbery that had been discussed on the phone. I felt the old version of myself returning, the founder who used to solve problems before they learned her fear. I arranged to meet the building neighbor who had been questioned by strangers. He described a man who visited my brother-in-law twice across the street. That evening, I confronted my sister privately, asking whether she knew about the policy in her name. She looked genuinely confused, saying her husband handled everything and she trusted him completely. Trust had become the central currency in that house, traded without receipts. When he returned from the contractor meeting, he joked that I worried too much and should focus on new beginnings. The child touched my foot under the table. As soon as adults left the room, she added, "He paid the man on Monday." Her revelation shifted the story from paranoia into mathematics. Payments, dates, shredded files, and break jokes about a car I didn't own were forming a single equation. I began planning formal steps to audit the family company using the small share I still possessed through the old trust. Adults continued underestimating me, believing the worst they had done was stealing a business. They did not yet realize the girl was stealing back my remaining life. 2 days later, the apartment camera recorded the same unknown man entering the corridor again, carrying tools and printed papers. My brother-in-law insisted I should stay away from the building for my safety, yet safety had changed sides entirely. I finally told my mother that I would audit everything publicly. She laughed on speaker, calling me ungrateful. As soon as her parents left the room, the child spoke into that laughter like a stone dropped into water. "Aunt, you must fight now." Fighting began to look possible. The emergency bag waited by the staircase, and a girl everyone believed mute was teaching me how to use my own voice again. The decision to audit the company cracked the house more loudly than any spoken argument I had attempted before. My mother called repeatedly saying I was embarrassing the family by questioning my sister's success. She reminded me how generously they had hosted me, how her son-in-law had arranged interviews and maintenance inspections like acts of charity. Charity built on my own shredded files felt less generous and more like a carefully folded net. Meanwhile, the apartment camera kept recording a different truth. Samina and I reviewed footage of the unknown man meeting my brother-in-law in the corridor again, placing printed schedules near the gas line. I began longer conversations with Emma whenever adults left the room, and her language started blooming like a forbidden garden. She described how her father forced her to remain silent in front of doctors, pretending therapy had not helped. The lie maintained disability benefits and also kept witnesses invisible. She confessed that the drive to the river road had been planned with the stranger to stage an accident where I would fall asleep from medicated water. My sister still claimed she knew nothing, yet ignorance had become another costume adults wore comfortably. 2 evenings before the public audit, her parents left again for shopping, and the girl spoke in the hallway holding her sketchbook. "They will empty the apartment tomorrow morning," she said, explaining that workers were instructed to remove tools and erase camera scratches. Erasing evidence had become the family profession I had never applied for. Samina advised me to keep acting calm until formal authorities were involved. Calmness required more discipline than the board meetings I once led. The audit day finally arrived. I told my sister that my lawyer would accompany me to the attic to collect remaining files. Her husband became tense, saying renovations had already begun and most old documents were gone. Gone exactly like the presentations I had created years earlier. In front of relatives, my mother complained that I was attacking blood ties for money. As soon as adults left the room to load groceries into the SUV, the child spoke directly to her grandmother for the first time in decades, saying aloud, "He planned to hurt Aunt." My mother's face turned pale, the way winter clouds do before a storm admits its name. The relatives froze between walls decorated with successful photos. Her husband returned upstairs unaware the girl had finally carried her secret voice into public territory. Doctors' reports, disability lies, and the insurance stamp all lost their invisibility within that single sentence. I realized then that my second life had been standing beside me holding a sketchbook like a fragile sword. Formal authorities were contacted that evening after my mother witnessed the medicated cup drawing herself. Samina collected all footage and prepared legal action for attempted harm and corporate theft. Adults continued begging for forgiveness, saying they only wanted to help me restart my career. Restarting a timeline built on robbery and medicated water looked less like help and more like confession without courage. Courage belonged entirely to a girl everyone believed mute. By the end of that evening, the SUV across the street waited without its passenger, and the apartment corridor waited without the stranger meant to empty it. The public audit had found its true founder again. And a child's impossible honesty had finally signed the papers adults had prepared to use against me. After the child spoke in front of my mother, events began moving with a speed that frightened the adults more than it did me. Formal investigators visited the attic that same evening accompanied by Samina, collecting the few remaining files that had survived the renovations. My brother-in-law tried to present himself as cooperative, saying the insurance policy had been created only to assist with relocation expenses. Relocation dressed as Mercy was finally standing under police lights. Meanwhile, the portable camera footage from my apartment showed a different narrative: tools placed near the gas line, copied keys, and scheduled visits from the stranger across the street. 2 days later, the brother-in-law and the unknown man were brought for questioning. Investigators discovered printed contracts on the USB that attempted to rewrite the founder history of my earlier business. My sister continued crying, insisting she had trusted her husband completely and had never imagined he would plan to hurt her own blood. Imagination had not protected me, listening had. Listening to a girl everyone believed could not speak. The maintenance corridor in my building was sealed, and real inspectors confirmed there had indeed been tampering with the kitchen line. The legal process unfolded like another board meeting where I finally sat at the head of the table. My name was restored in audit records through the old trust share I still possessed. Payments traced from the family company to the stranger's account proved collaboration aimed at staging the River Road accident. Instead of interviews meant to restart my career, the family faced charges that threatened to end theirs entirely. Adults kept begging my mother to convince me to forgive them, unaware forgiveness was not the currency courts accepted. Throughout those evenings, Emma and I had longer conversations whenever her parents left the room again. She explained how frightened she had been to testify publicly, how her father punished her for speaking by taking away the sketchbook and locking her room. Yet every authority visit returned the book to her hands, and with it her language. Doctors re-examined the girl and confirmed she had never been physically unable to speak, only trained into silence. The therapy lie collapsed like a building discovering its real architect. 1 month after the arrests, my mother visited my apartment with the child alone. As soon as adult doors closed again, she spoke in a reflective, gentle tone. "Aunt, you are safe now." Safety felt new, like receiving citizenship after years of exile. My sister called repeatedly asking for help with bail money. The family photos on her wall were removed by investigators as evidence. Evidence of a success story built on theft of what I created. I finally began planning a new venture using the restored emails and presentations that survived in servers. Media channels reported how a child's testimony had uncovered corporate fraud and attempted harm within a single family. My mother publicly admitted she had underestimated me and had underestimated the silent granddaughter even more. Underestimation had nearly cost me my life. Silence was no longer empty. It was crowded with investigators, courtroom dates, and a girl's brave sentences walking freely through rooms where adults once controlled language. The river road that waited to swallow me had finally swallowed the antagonist's confidence instead. And confidence was returned to its true founder, guided there by the only honest voice in that house. The final month of the investigation felt like standing on the balcony of a storm that had already decided to leave. My apartment was returned to me not as a half-broken shell, but as an official crime scene report with my name written correctly on every page. The courts moved to freeze the insurance policy and the family company accounts, while Samina prepared the civil case to restore ownership of the business I had created years earlier. Ownership was no longer an emotional argument between sisters. It had become a documented fact carried in thick folders by people wearing government badges. My sister visited me once after the questioning ended. She looked smaller without the silver SUV parked beneath her confidence, asking whether I would help protect her daughter from the publicity. I told her I would protect the girl, but I could not protect the lies adults had built around her childhood. The difference between those two sentences felt like the difference between breathing and pretending to breathe. Emma waited in the hallway listening to our conversation like a careful judge. Whenever adult footsteps faded from rooms, the girl continued speaking more freely, and her language began telling us who she might become instead of who doctors had declared she was. She described how frightened she had been during therapy sessions, how her father instructed her to act like a shadow so benefits and sympathy could be harvested from that darkness. Harvesting from darkness had been the family profession I had never noticed until a child decided to switch on lights with her tongue alone. The portable camera footage played in court one afternoon, showing the stranger entering my corridor and my brother-in-law using a copied key. The unknown man admitted collaboration for money, proving the River Road meeting had been designed as a staged robbery followed by medicated water to make me sleep through tampering with the gas line. Sleeping had once looked like my only escape from humiliation. Now it looked like the method chosen to end my timeline entirely. The judge listened to the girl's testimony, confirming what she had spoken privately to me earlier. 2 weeks later, formal verdicts were announced: arrests for attempted harm, forgery of medical reports, and theft of intellectual property. Media channels reported how a mute child had uncovered adult deception by choosing justice over blood loyalty. Loyalty was redefined in that house not by degrees and cars, but by a sketchbook filled with honest drawings. My mother publicly apologized for underestimating the daughter who packed emergency bags out of anxiety instead of ambition. By Christmas of the following year, I launched another venture using restored presentations and emails, and confidence returned to me like a visitor who finally knew the correct address. I credited my second life to Ama in every interview, saying the miracle was not that she spoke, but that she had spoken to save someone instead of to impress someone. Impressing belonged entirely to adults who lost everything after a child decided to testify. I no longer believed that family dinners measured worth correctly. Worth was standing beside me holding a fragile sword of language. Silence had not been empty at all. It had been a locked room waiting for parents to leave. And a girl everyone believed mute had used that single impossible freedom to save my life and teach the world how truth sometimes chooses the smallest mouth in the house.